Veganism, the diet, the lifestyle, the ideology. Should you go full vegan? Stay tuned to find out. It should be noted that whenever I say full vegan, I mean to say embrace everything that has ever been believed or has ever been acted upon in the name of veganism. So I will spend a little bit of time considering the beliefs of those who consider themselves full vegan and not just the dietary lifestyle. You best believe that I'll consider myself the middleman between the human herbivores and the human carnivores and talk from the perspective of a human omnivore. You know, because we are omnivores. Did you know that you can still drink beer and wine for every meal and still be considered a vegan? Did you know you could eat nothing but potato chips and french fries with ketchup and still be considered a vegan? You can crouton and Italian dressing the shiznit out of your salad and still be considered a vegan. You could say that my main motivation for covering this topic is because I have been a dietary vegan in the past. And from my personal experience, it is doable and I saw many health benefits. But the vegan philosophy is kind of easy to poke holes in through my perspective. But I will get into that closer to the end of the video. For now, I will just consider the biological implications for those who lean towards either extreme of being either a vegan or a meatitarian. From a couple of individuals I found who claim to be meatitarian, their reasons for switching to that diet, like veganism, also has to do with health-based reasons. Do you have high blood sugar? Eating nothing but meat would lead to a low-carb diet, leading to health benefits such as weight loss and a stabilized blood sugar post-meal. Are you allergic to a bunch of fruits, dairy, or any other food group? Meat can provide a consistent and safe meal for you to eat. But the thing is, all these health-based reasons could justify veganism too. The main health problem from eating meat comes from eating too much of the fat. However, a meta-analysis of over 347,000 people over 23 years studied the effects of saturated fat with cardiovascular disease, and it showed that there is no significant evidence for concluding that eating saturated fat is associated with increased levels of heart disease and cardiovascular issues. However, there does appear to be a link between eating higher levels of processed red meat and cardiovascular issues. So keep that in mind whenever you are out buying for a meatitarian diet. Don't buy processed red meat. Yet another reason to consider the meatitarian perspective is that only animals make cholesterol. And we need cholesterol in order to live. Now, I'm not saying that we can only get our cholesterol from outside sources. On the contrary, our bodies make a lot of cholesterol, even if we eat no cholesterol. But let's consider, for instance, that you are in a terrible accident and you get a big gaping wound as a result of that accident. Now, I know this is a terrible argument, but bear with me for a moment. If you eat meat, your blood will coagulate faster and you are more likely to survive from a gaping wound incident compared to your vegan counterpart who will be bleeding out from an identical wound. Let yourself live! Eat meat! But then again, the counter notion for veganism is that you are less likely to die of cardiovascular issues later on in life whenever you don't eat meat. Because of the exact same reason, your blood doesn't coagulate on the inside. Let yourself live! Don't eat meat! Researchers say that just eliminating animal products does not necessarily make you healthier, nor does it allow you to live longer. I have yet to see any evidence that shows that vegans and vegetarians live healthier or longer on average than their healthy eating omnivorian counterparts. Studies have only shown that vegetarians and vegans only live longer than those on the typical American diet that contain meat. But that really doesn't say much because most Americans eat way too much processed meat, salt, and sugar. What people who are full vegan need are tests that compare health-conscious omnivores versus health-conscious vegans and test and see who is living longer. But as far as simple correlation research goes, health-conscious omnivores are winning, and that really doesn't help veganism's case. Much evidence suggests that the optimum diet contains at least some form of animal product in it, which really shouldn't be surprising for a mammal that evolved to be an omnivore. Here are some of the best diets that correlate to a long life. For example, the Okinawa diet, which is the diet for people from the Ryukyu Islands that used to have the longest lifespans. And it includes small amounts of fish and pork with the fat boiled off. The highly sought-after Mediterranean diet also includes a moderate consumption of dairy products, a moderate to high consumption of fish, and low consumption of meat products. And the long-living Vilcabambans of the Andes live on a flexible vegetarian diet of fruit, veggies, protein-based foods, which can include chicken, eggs, turkey, fish, etc. Dan Buettner, the National Geographic, and the world's best longevity researchers have discovered 5 areas where people live to be 100, 10 times greater than what they do in the United States. And these areas are in Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Ikaria, Greece, and among the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. And only in Loma Linda did there contain actual true vegans and vegetarians. But in fact, within this group, the ones who lived the longest were those who identified as Pesco-vegetarian. So the evidence seems to point to the fact that if healthy lives in general create longer lives, then veganism is not as healthy as vegetarianism, and vegetarianism is not as healthy as Pesco-vegetarianism. But what is in fact healthy? Well, science actually gives us a pretty decent algorithmic answer, which I highly recommend that you guys watch for knowledge-seeking purposes. I will point out what specific link to follow in the description. And it is a pretty good video that explains what can be healthy for one person can be considered not healthy for another person. The algorithm is based off an Israeli study which discovered that even after eating identical foods, the way those foods metabolize differed dramatically from one person to another, which was tested in the form of well-documented post-meal blood glucose readings. Now let's compare the individual's economic impact for choosing any one of these diets to be either vegan, meatitarian, or just a normal omnivorian. And I was kind of surprised by what they found because it seems kind of counterintuitive to me. I don't know how that's the case because from my personal anecdotal experience, I found myself spending more on my vegan diet than I had been on spending on the omnivorian diet. I don't know, maybe I didn't spend money like a normal vegan whenever I ate like one. Perhaps I was spending too much money on the more expensive meat substitute options, while normal long-term vegans usually give up fake meat entirely and find new sources to amass protein, like broccoli. Honestly, I'm having a hard time accepting this data even though it seemed reliable. So if you are a vegan or have ever been on a vegan diet for longer than 1 month, I would love to hear how you spend money on food in the comment section below to help me reconcile my beliefs from apparent facts. Finally, it is time to bring to your attention what I consider the good philosophy within veganism, before I mention my negatory concerns. Now this may sound like a no-brainer, but biologists believe that brain size relative to body size relates to intelligence. So animals with large brain to body size tend to exhibit higher intelligences compared to those with smaller brains. Humans, chimps, and dolphins tend to exhibit higher intelligences because of their larger brain to body size. And this derives mostly because of their larger cerebral cortexes, which is the part of the brain where higher reasoning functions. But one thing that vegans have going for them is that whenever it comes to the emotional feeling part of the brain, the limbic system, mammals tend to show just as large a limbic system to body weight as do humans. This implies that non-human mammals feel as much pain and pleasure as humans do. So this means that animals such as cow, sheep, and pigs, all of our basic cattle, rely on their emotions to learn what to do to survive. However, one of the problems that I have with vegan philosophy is that they do not have a uniform consensus of what exactly constitutes as an animal. In the philosophical statement of not harming or exploiting animals as far as what is possible or practicable. For example, do insects count? Because I'm pretty sure that there are some creative ways where we could eat them, get our proteins, and leave the more complex animals alone. And on this note, there are millions and millions of bees that are being killed because of insecticides that are being sprayed on almond orchards, which ultimately get used in making a very common vegan product, almond milk. But if you include the term animals to include insects as well, you could say that this is a Class A example of speciesism. If you include insects and all lives count the same, then how can you justify killing so many bees for almond milk, which can amount to genocide when killing only one tuna or one huge cow can feed many people but still only cost one life. Another problem that I have with the vegan philosophy is that the logical outcome to a strict adherence to not exploiting or harming animals as far as what is possible and practical is either self-castration, if you consider yourself an animal not to be harmed, or suicide. If you remove your future genome or yourself out of the equation, then you will not exploit or harm animals. And doing this is possible and practicable. So therefore, sayonara, I guess? No. Please do not do that. Toss out that strict vegan philosophy, or at least adopt it to make sense. And yet another argument that I have against the vegan philosophy is that when adhered to, it doesn't focus on the root of the problem, but one of the branches that come about as a result. It focuses on the personal purities that come along from the moral dilemma that comes from harming animals. rather than attempting to change the social system that encourages people to oftentimes use whatever animal products are available. All veganism does as a philosophy is take one person out of the animal harming economic market and refer them to the animal passive economic market. Compare for a moment human rights to animal rights. With this logic, because human rights abuses can never be completely eliminated without constant fear-inducing Big Brother cameras over every waking corner of the planet, we should not defend human rights in situations that we control, because, we control those situations. It would be like me saying to my wife, Kaida, I would never hit you, as an argument to stop human abuse. It does nothing about the asshole who is hitting his wife right now. Therefore, saying, animals, I will never do anything to harm you, does nothing about the corrupt systems that are harming animals right now. A last argument that I have against veganism is that most people cannot sustain a vegan diet and be considered healthy. I personally have gone on a vegan diet twice just to test its effects on my type 1 diabetes. And although it caused the amount of insulin that I needed to inject myself with to significantly drop from a 1 to 6 or 7 carb ratio to a 1 to 25 to 30 carb ratio, I ultimately had to listen to my body, which told me to eat some legitimate meat. And I'm not the only one who abandoned the diet when health issues arose. So when vegans do studies on the health benefits of long-term vegans, they never would have considered me to be studied as a long-term vegan, even though I was one for several months. This just means that most studies that claim better health for vegans have excluded the very evidence that would prove it not true. Also consider the lifespans of wild animals compared to domesticated animals. Wild animals don't have the protection against prey and diseases, as the domesticated animals do, and they live shorter lives. Protected white-tailed deer, for example, can have a lifespan of up to 15 years. But in the wild, males tend to live only 2 years, and females only live about 3 years. And that is about a 5-fold difference in lifespan. We provide domesticated animals protection from predators, food, and the ability to raise their young. And in return, they provide us with food and clothing. And if we somehow eliminated the painful methods of killing, we would solve a lot of the moral dilemma that comes about from eating them. I think it's time for another thought experiment that I found from one of my sources, and honestly, it's too good of an argument to really pass up. Imagine, if you will, if a super intelligent, benevolent alien race came along and they gave us 2 choices. The first choice being, we will leave you guys alone and we will let you live your short lives as you wish, which would basically be a high and buy option with no strings attached. And the second choice the aliens would give us would be, we will protect you from harm and we will increase your lifespans 3-fold. We will not interfere with your life except to make you live longer and happier. You will still have all the freedoms you want, you just won't feel pain, we will eliminate your suffering, and we will eliminate all your diseases. However, after you reached your 300-year-old birthday, we will painlessly put you to death and do what we wish with your bodies. Of course we would know that they would eat us, but still, I don't know about you, but I would seriously consider option 2. Wouldn't you? So we have debunked how veganism generally functions in its current form and can definitively say, no, you should not go full vegan. But what might be some easier means by which vegans can reach their desired, and should be everyone's desired, ends? We could all agree that insects are generally a more ethical source of protein for us, and we could each just get over our personal notions that bugs are nasty to eat. I mean, especially if they are well prepared and undergo similar food safety procedures. There are already businesses in the insect protein making business, and apparently their cost of production when compared to gram for gram, it is twice as efficient as chicken and 6 times as efficient as beef. There are a bunch of stuff with crickets in it, and I have had a couple myself. I just wish that they were a little bit more mainstream. Hashtag not a sponsor to any particular insect farming company. We could eventually grow into a society where we grow all of our meat in a lab. Eventually, we may have the ability to grow meat in abundance without the exploiting, harming, or killing any animal to get it. And I personally hope this is what happens. It would do the least amount of harm to animals, it has been proven possible, and upwards of 7 businesses are already trying to make this a mainstream thing. And then everyone will have access to healthier and vegan meat. It is legit meat, but it is vegan. This is the 21st century, people. Tyson, why are you jumping on this vegan meat bandwagon? Heck, perhaps in the far future, we may be able to genetically alter our animals so that they would want us to eat them. In an episode of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there is a very obliging Amygdalian major cow from a species of dairy animal that not only has the desire to be eaten, but also capable of speaking English in order to communicate that desire. Vegans may still have ethical concerns about this also, perhaps wanting to give psychiatric help to the darn near suicidal cow. In the similarly far future, we might also be able to genetically alter ourselves to get our energy straight from the sun, to go straight from vegetarian to energarian. We can do like the highly evolved SpongeBob and photosynthesis, and bam, mealtime's over. But anywho, I know this kind of got ridiculous towards the end, but hopefully as a result of all this research, you can be inspired to act in ways that can better yourself and the world around you that would make a vegan proud without being a vegan yourself. This video was made by Tim and Kaida Snavely on a channel called Death of a Notion, and definitely not by people who go shiz for broke for the sake of animals that have already been killed and processed for our consumption, nor by people who go shiz for broke to eat 15 pounds of meat a week. Yes, we still hold on to the notion that veganism and vegetarian diets are more expensive. Hashtag bread is cheap. If you would like to become more enlightened, depressed, or enraged with us, depending on your previous notions, please do us a giddy and click on those like and subscribe buttons, and join our fellow sea creatures who live in the Notion Ocean. And until next time, kumbaya, mother duckers.